If you're an investor in IDFC First Bank, I'm sure the last few weeks have been, well, pretty stressful. You've got a sharp drop in the stock price, you've got rumors of a massive fraud swirling around. It's enough to make anyone a bit nervous. So what we're going to do is separate the facts from all that fear. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what happened, what it really means, and what you should be watching for next. Yeah, and this quote right here, it pretty much says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that wave of panic that just washed over the market. A 20% drop is a huge deal, and it's all being driven by that one powerful word, fraud. So is all this fear justified? Well, to answer that, we've got to break down what actually happened. So let's get right to it. What on earth is the root cause of this 20% crash? The short answer is the bank announced a suspected fraud. But the devil is always in the details, and the where and the how of this whole thing, that's absolutely crucial to understanding the full picture. Okay, now the most important word on this slide, maybe in this whole story, is single. The initial information we have suggests this isn't some widespread systemic issue infecting the entire bank. It appears to be localized, contained to a few employees at one specific branch in Chandigarh. And that context is the very first step in getting a real sense of the scale of the problem. So how did this all come to light? You might think it was some fancy fraud detection algorithm, right? Nope. It was actually way more mundane than that. It all started with a totally routine request. A department of the Haryana government just wanted to close its account. But when the bank went to do it, they realized, whoops, the numbers don't add up. What was in their records wasn't what was supposed to be there. And that one little red flag is what kicked off a wider review of other government accounts, which unfortunately turned up even more problems. The bank's preliminary review gives us another key clue. Right now, it's pointing towards a few specific employees who were allegedly making transactions they weren't supposed to, and maybe even colluding with people outside the bank. For now, this just reinforces that idea of a localized, branch-level issue, not a fundamental failure of the bank's entire system. Of course, the full forensic audit is what's going to tell us for sure if that's true. Okay, let's talk about the big, scary number, the one that's been plastered all over the headlines, causing all the fear, 590 crore rupees. I mean, it just sounds enormous, doesn't it? But we have to look past that headline and really understand what this figure actually represents. So there it is. But look very closely at that subtitle, Total Amount Under Reconciliation. That is not the same thing as total amount lost. Not even close. This is the total pot of money they're investigating. The final actual loss is expected to be just a fraction of this. And this slide really nails the difference between the headline and the reality. The actual financial damage is going to depend entirely on how much of that money the bank can successfully recover. So think of that big, scary number as the starting points for the investigation, not the final bill for the damages. So you might be wondering, okay, if the final loss is going to be much lower, why did the market react so violently? Well, that's a great question, and the answer is pretty simple. When investors hear the word fraud attached to a bank, they don't wait for the final numbers. They react to fear and uncertainty. Let's dig into that psychology. The sell-off was really a perfect storm of these fears. Investors start worrying, what if there's more they haven't found yet? They get concerned about how much profit the bank will have to set aside to cover the loss. But most importantly, it raises these fundamental questions about the bank's internal checks and balances. And all of that can directly impact their quarterly profits if the recovery isn't strong. Now, amidst all this panic, how a bank's management responds is absolutely critical. A weak response can make a bad situation a million times worse. But in this case, IDFC First Bank moved quickly and decisively with a clear four-part response. They didn't mess around. It was methodical and comprehensive. First, they immediately suspended the officials involved. Then, they brought in outside experts for an impartial forensic audit. They initiated legal action, filing a police complaint. And crucially, they started the recovery process right away by asking other banks to freeze any suspicious funds. This is pretty much a textbook crisis response. And here's the kind of counterintuitive part. While the fraud itself is obviously a major negative, the bank's transparent and rapid response can actually be seen as a positive signal. It shows that management isn't trying to hide the problem, and when it comes to rebuilding trust for the long term, that is everything. So we understand what happened and why the market panicked. Now for the most important part, what happens next? Instead of just reacting to the fear, a smart investor shifts their focus to monitoring the key developments that are going to give us real clarity.
Now, before we get to the list of what to monitor, let's quickly define a key term you're going to be hearing a lot: provisioning. It's simple, really. When a bank thinks it's going to have a loss, like from this fraud, it sets aside a portion of its profits to cover it, kind of like a rainy day fund. The size of this provision in the next quarterly results will be a direct indicator of the financial hit.
Okay, so these are the 4 things to keep your eyes on. First, the results of that external audit. Is it going to confirm this was just a few bad apples? Second, the recovery success. How much of that 590 crore do they actually get back? Third, that provisioning level in the upcoming financial results. And finally, what concrete steps will the bank take to strengthen its internal controls so this can't be repeated? So the path forward is pretty clear. If that audit confirms the issue is contained, and if the bank recovers a significant chunk of the funds, investor sentiment is very likely to improve. But until we get that clarity, you should just expect the stock to remain volatile. Uncertainty is the absolute enemy of a stable stock price. And all of this brings us to the final, crucial question that everything really hinges on. Was this just an unfortunate but isolated incident caused by a few rogue employees, or is it a symptom of a much deeper crack in the bank's internal control systems? The answer to that question is what will determine the long-term future for IDFC First Bank and all of its investors.